This is TV18, and you're watching Cnbc TV18.
Hello and welcome to this special discussion here on Cnbc TV18 as we celebrate 10 years of the India Business Leader Awards. I'm Shireen Bhan. Today we're going to talk about leadership and whether India has been future-proofed enough. Joining me is the preeminent jury of the India Business Leader Awards. Let me start by introducing them to you. Let me start by introducing them from the right. Mr. D. Shivakumar, Mr. N.R. Narayanamurthy, Mr. D. Parikh, Nainalal Kidwai and Cyril Shroff. Appreciate you joining us here. You know, in the context of the issue of leadership, Mr. Murthy, let me start by asking you, and everybody's talking about India. The World Bank is talking about the Modi dividend. The stock markets are talking about the Hope Rally. You know, we've now seen a position where people are talking about a possible re-rating of India. Just in terms of the leadership change and what the new leadership is promising in terms of economic reforms, the pace of reforms, what do you make of the India story? And do you believe that we are at least future-proofed for the next 5 years as far as India is concerned?
Well, I think Mr. Modi is a very charismatic personality. He has brought a new sense of confidence. He has created high aspirations for our people. This is the first step in any leadership task. The second step is to ensure that people work hard, are disciplined, bring in some new ideas, and make sure they happen. So the first step, to some extent, has been done. We still have a long way to go, and I'm positive, knowing Mr. Modi as I do, he would certainly make sure that other steps also happen.
Mr. Parikh, you know, the sense one gets is that while people like what they hear in terms of what this government is articulating, they want to see the climax. They want to see how this is all going to end. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, so to speak. Are you cautiously optimistic, nervously optimistic, or just confident about the India story today?
No, I'm reasonably confident about the India story. You know, the changes that Mr. Modi has to make are most of the changes are legislative changes. Labor reforms, land acquisition, GST. These can't be done in a hurry. This takes time. And, you know, but the Prime Minister is leading from the front. He has created huge expectations, and not only in India, but all over the world. So
but the risk of creating huge expectations is also that if you don't live up to those expectations, then the disappointment is equally high.
But if we want to get back in 3-4 years to the 9% GDP growth, we need to have high expectations.
But do you believe we are likely to get back to the 9% kind of GDP growth?
I personally think every year we can increase at least 100 basis points of GDP growth.
Without legislative reforms?
Well, with some legislative reforms.
Okay. Naina, would you agree? Get back to a 9% kind of growth trajectory with some legislative reforms over the next 3 to 4 years?
I believe we have some low-hanging fruit. GST is one where analysis suggests that you add 2% just by bringing it in. So these sort of reforms, which are very clearly on the agenda of this government, in fact, one of the first things our finance minister did was begin to tackle this, are in fact some of the ways that this government could very quickly achieve this. And I do believe that the natural rate of growth for India has to be at 8%. We've been there before, and we can get back there very quickly.
But, you know, things like the GST, as Mr. Parikh was saying, requires legislative change. If you just look at what happened in the first session of this government in Parliament, we didn't really see very much headway as far as legislative action was concerned. On that basis, do you feel that perhaps when it comes to legislative reform, we may have to wait longer, but when it comes to things like fixing the nuts and bolts to make it easier for people to do business, which is what the Prime Minister is promising, perhaps we could see some headway there?
Yeah, of course it's easier. And I think the mood change is certainly one where, you know, if you look at companies who had possibly moved away from thinking of investing in India, India's back on the radar screen. Yeah. Have they actually signed the checks? Maybe not. But the mood change becomes important to bring that investment back in. So that's an early win. individuals and people, I think, you know, we were in the US at the time of our Prime Minister's visit, and the interest again in the talented non-resident community to return, to give to India, also begins to win in an environment of hope and progress and change. So I think these are some of the early benefits that India does gain from, even while we wait for the tougher legislative changes to happen. But I still believe there's a lot that you do need legislative changes. Tax administration. Tax administration isn't about legislative change. It is about the way we execute on existing tax laws and tax reform therein. And those have got to be easy wins.
Mr. Shroff, would you agree that while the mood has changed, the checkbooks are out, but the checks are not being written just yet? What is it going to take for the checks to be written?
So I think firstly we should look at it as a test match, not as a T20.
Sure.
I think that's probably the first, just in terms of setting the expectations. And there are multiple dimensions to this. There's legislative, there is tax reform, there is a whole sort of administrative reform. And I think multiple people are involved. I think to expect only government to do something, I think is probably just putting the responsibility on just one constituency. I think industry needs to do it. And every stakeholder really has a role to play in this and needs to understand that responsibility. I think leadership is key because, and I think we have a fantastic leader in terms of the nation, in terms of inspiring us, but it has to trickle down really to all constituencies. And speaking from the profession that I come from, I think the rule of law is also very important. One of the big worries of international investors is certainty, because there is a lot of anxiety and uncertainty about whether there is really a functioning rule of law here. We do wear it on our sleeve very often, and I think it stands out prominently in comparison with many other markets. But then you have a lot of investment theses on, you know, critical large investments which suddenly just vanish.
For instance, the coal verdict.
Exactly. There are a few like that, and didn't want to mention a specific case, but that spooks out investors a lot. So I think it's much more holistic. We need to sort of take our time over it and do it thoroughly and sensibly, and not expect any immediate sort of outcomes in the short term. I think the journey is well set, the direction is very clear, and I'm very, very hopeful. I quite agree with both Naina and Deepak Bhai.
So, Shiv, let me get you to wrap up this part of the conversation before I move to the next issue. The journey is well set, the direction is clear, there is alignment between what the government is articulating and what the government is hopefully going to do in terms of policy and reform agenda. How confident do you feel that the consumption story is going to be back, that the investment cycle is going to kickstart and revive?
That's a good point. So, at the big picture level, is there a clear vision or a statement of vision? Almost certainly is. Okay, has that been able to energize people across the country and across the world? Absolutely yes. But very clearly that needs to translate to specific plans. To the external world, they need to have confidence that India is a good place to invest in, is a consistent place for the future. In the internal world, which is in India, we need to create 12 to 15 million jobs. Otherwise, all this will lead to more social strife if we don't create enough jobs. So I think that's the balance one needs to do. And you have to pick the right industries to see where the consumption story is really going to come through. If you do not really get Rural Act right, it's unlikely that the consumption story will come, because it's really buoyed up the consumption story for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So you really have to look at geography and the industries to get the right mix.
You know, I want to pick up on a point that Mr. Shroff made there, that it's not just about the government and what the government does or doesn't do, but each stakeholder has to look at using this opportunity and capitalizing on this opportunity. Let me ask you, Mr. Murthy, you know, we just had some data come out yesterday or a couple of days earlier, where of the top 100 brands in the world, there is one brand which is has Indian parentage, or at least has been acquired by an Indian company. There are no other Indian brands in the global list of top 100 brands. So, I mean, you know, we can put the onus on the government, but what about industry, and what industry needs to do to also establish world-class, reputable brands?
Well, you know, you're right. By and large, the success of the Indian industry abroad has been in B2B. The software industry is primarily in B2B. If you want to create powerful brands, you have to go to B2C. Therefore, our banks, our consumer manufacturing companies, and FCMG companies, these are the companies that have the potential to create huge brands, as long as we provide better than world-class products at attractive prices and invade every shelf in every supermarket and make it used by every household. I think that is the way to create consumer brands. I think right now we are still at a very early stage of B2B interaction.
But Shiv, wouldn't you agree that this requires a reorientation, so to speak? Indian companies need to move beyond labor arbitrage, low-cost arbitrage, need to think more in terms of differentiation, specialization, extracting a specialization premium, building a brand. Don't you think that kind of reorientation is yet to happen as far as Indian industry is concerned?
Absolutely.
With the exception of a few.
Yeah, you mentioned the report. So Apple's got $100 billion turnover roughly. Their brand value is about 110, 120. So that's about 1:1.1. If you look at any business in India, that ratio is 1:0.1. So a $100 billion business in India has a brand value which is 10 billion. So that ratio is very different. Why does that happen? If you don't go up the value chain in innovation, in design, in consumer and customer impact, you will not get that brand value. So I think we need to move from the business of business to the business of brands. Indian businesses value market cap ahead of brand value. So till that mentality shifts, you will not get brand building.
Mr. Parekh, are we likely to see an Indian financial services company compete globally and be part of these lists that one talks about?
I think we will over time. You see, most Indian companies, Indian banks were all concentrating all these years in the domestic market.
Sure.
Because the domestic market has huge opportunities. Then the rural market opened up. So everyone is concentrating on that. It is just the last few years when again the slowdown happened. So people again became more cautious. Indian corporates became cautious. But I'm sure in the next 5 years you will see Indian banks or Indian institution or brands going abroad, and some beginning has been made. I'm sure in the next decade you will see half a dozen in that list of yours.
Well, what do you see as the biggest challenge to be able to do that?
There is no challenge of foreign exchange. Earlier that was the biggest handicap. We were not allowed to invest abroad. That has changed over the last few years.
There's no regulatory hurdle in that sense.
There is no regulatory. You see, you have to compete in different countries with those local brands. And if you just see how Indian banks are performing in Singapore or in London, they're not doing that well. They've been there for 20 years, 30 years. But the Indian institutions abroad are unfortunately not doing well because they cannot, as the foreign companies here, foreign banks in India, can never compete with State Bank by lending money because their base lending rate is always much, much higher than the state banks or the public sector banks. So we have the same issue when we go abroad. Foreign banks do well in India because they offer other products like treasury and derivatives and trading facilities. They don't make money in lending. So I think we have to develop new innovative products. We basically only concentrate on the NRI community when we go abroad in the banking sector. We should enlarge it, but for that you need more capital, more manpower, different products. You need time to be able to handle the, you will not make money immediately. To make losses for many years till you get some size of the market.
May this Diwali bring you lots of happiness, lots of wealth and good health.
CNBC TV18 wishes you a profitable Diwali.
Have you ever noticed how in Hollywood movies all the villains are played by Brits?
Maybe we just sound right.
Good evening, sir.
Thank you, Mary.
We're more focused, more precise.
With a certain style.
And we're obsessed by power.
And we all drive Jaguars. Oh, yes. It's good to be bad.
Weekends. They are so exciting because Dad takes me out to watch a game of polo. He's the best on the field. And his team always wins. But after the game, I always find him with a rival team. I realized that my dad has many opponents, but not a single enemy.
Working 9 to 5, but first 5 to 9. Putting in a few hours more for a few seconds less. That time between dreaming and creating, and the 25th hour is made. And while the world may say there are only so many minutes in a day, there are few who know better.
Kids will love it, and parents will love it even more. NSE Financial Quest Season 4, powered by Cnbc Tv18, an investor education initiative by NSE IPFT. India's first financial literacy program for 8th and 9th grade students. Coming soon on CNBC TV18.
Presented by National Stock Exchange.
गारमेंट्स में कुछ भी हो, बस टीटी गारमेंट्स। अच्छे लगें, अच्छे दिखें, टीटी। गारमेंट्स में कुछ भी हो, बस टीटी गारमेंट्स। अच्छे लगें, अच्छे दिखें, टीटी।
गांधी जी ने कहा था, मैं बड़े अदब और दृढ़ता से कहना चाहता हूँ कि गंदगी हमारे आसपास बिल्कुल ना हो और सफाई हमें खुद करनी चाहिए।
क्या हम तय करें कि 2019 जब महात्मा गांधी की 150वीं जयंती बनाएंगे, हमारा गांव, हमारा शहर, हमारा गली, हमारा मोहल्ला, हमारी स्कूल, हमारे मंदिर, हमारी अस्पताल, सभी क्षेत्र गंदगी का नामो निशान नहीं रहने देंगे।
आइए हम सब मिलकर स्वच्छता का संकल्प लें और एक स्वच्छ भारत की रचना करें। स्वच्छ भारत, एक कदम स्वच्छता की ओर।
आर कबल्स CNBC आवाज रियल एस्टेट अवार्ड्स 2014।
अगर आप एक डेवलपर या बिल्डर हैं और आप चाहते हैं आपके प्रोजेक्ट बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस आए दुनिया के सामने, तो हिस्सा बनिए रियल एस्टेट के सबसे बड़े बेंचमार्क का। आइए करें उनका सम्मान जो दे रहे हैं देश को नई पहचान।
नॉमिनेशंस के लिए SMS करें REA 51818 पर या लॉग ऑन करें www.realestateawards.in.com पर।
Presented by RR Kabul, वायर नहीं भारत की नब्ज हैं हम। Associate sponsor RR Parkin, Prayag Sanitary Ware and Sinks, touching life every day, and commonflow.com, no डर find घर। Research partner Liazis Foraz.
Sage in the story, white is in the fray. We're alone in the sea. It's the way you make me feel.
Monte Carlo Thermal Wear. It's the way you make me feel.
Just in terms of competitiveness, Naina, are Indian companies really looking beyond the low-cost model to focus on things like innovation, to focus on things like R&D, to really compete at that level then in the global space?
So I think, if we begin to narrow it down to the brand issue, we lose out on the innovation that's happening in the B2B space. India has emerged as a major player in auto ancillaries. And to some extent, that is because of the innovations we do around low-cost, high-quality delivery. That is why we become a supplier to the world. So if you look at global supply chains and the role that India is beginning to play in global supply chains, it's B2B. It's not going to win on a brand survey like you described, but it is beginning to happen in a major way. Indian pharma plays in the global pharma space. Indian IT, as Mr. Narayanmurthy mentioned, plays in the global ITES and IT space. And Indian auto plays in the Indian auto ancillary space and will increasingly play in the Indian auto space, but the brands may well be foreign. It's a great achievement. Now, from that, does the big next India brand emerge? Remains to be seen, but I don't think that should be our objective. I think it's very important that we focus on what we know and not waste our dollars on the marketing and branding in trying to create a global brand. Having said that, if you look at the region, you will find there are players like the Daburs, the Maricos, etc., who are playing quite strongly, not just in South Asia, but increasingly in Southeast Asia. And I don't think we should ignore that, whereas these surveys tend to be very Western-oriented.
Sure.
Yeah.
Cyril Shroff, you know, in terms of M&A aspirations, corporate India has been looking outside. We've done some big-ticket acquisitions. I just mentioned one of them, of course, that was JLR, the Tata Motors did. But do you see a lot more of that happening now as Indian companies have enough capital, but they now look at expanding their aspirations outside of India? Do you think it's going to be inorganic-led?
Not yet. I think it's going to take a little while. But I'd like to just supplement some of the comments and how I see where the problem is. I think firstly we have a policy and regulatory schizophrenia. We haven't quite decided as to really whether we are pro-business or not. And I think there's an inherent...
Even today?
I think even today. And I think there is an inherent bias against scale. So if you look at the underpinnings of a lot of regulation, I think big is bad. I don't think we have got over. So I think the political conversation is more right of center, but I think the bureaucracy and the actual legislation or the policy making is clearly still left of center. I think we're still 30, 40 years behind. And that synchronization I don't think has happened. So we'll have all this talk, but I think on the ground, when it comes down to really signing the checks, as Naina said, you're going to hit into these roadblocks. And when it comes to people like me, that before they sign the check, I have to sign an opinion in most cases. And there are a lot of gray areas over there, which I think become the actual roadblock. So I think the first thing that needs to be done at a more sort of policy level is to get that synchronization between right of center thinking and right of center policy aligned first. So I think that is a problem.
Mr. Parekh and Mr. Murthy, let me get the two of you to comment on what I think Mr. Shroff has mentioned, which is very, very interesting, this regulatory schizophrenia that we sometimes suffer from in India. Mr. Parekh, let me start by asking you, you know, you'll have the Prime Minister or politicians talking about Make in India, rolling out the red carpet, doing away with the red tape and so on and so forth. And on the very same day, you'll have Nokia shutting down its largest special economic zone, which was generating employment and so on and so forth in the country over a royalty-related issue.
No, I think it's very clear that you know, what the foreign investors want is total clarity. They are black or white. Most of the tax laws and company law and everything is grey, and they don't know where they stand. Now, they're not used to working in environments with uncertainty. And, you know, they plan years and years ahead. So unless there is clarity, total clarity on taxation, royalty, transfer pricing, number of people are worried about investment because they've seen some of the other companies having massive battles with the regulatory bodies and tax department over refunds and about payments. And so unless we get our rules, laws, regulations clear, either black or white, yes or no, nothing maybe. That is the most important. And you know, the way our acts and Companies Act and income tax, corporate tax, I find there are so many lacunas and loopholes that it suits the Indian business community but doesn't suit foreign investors.
Mr. Murthy, you've been on several committees, you know, looking after or trying to address some of these issues. Do you believe that we've seen any reorientation in being able to address the problem and arrive at a better solution?
No, let me give you one simple example. In 2004, Dr. Manmohan Singh wanted me to be the chairman of Investment Commission. He met me several times and I told him very politely, very respectfully, no. He said, why are you? I said, I am not very sure that our executive is prepared to do what is necessary for us to welcome investments into India. He said, aren't you being unnecessarily harsh? I said, I'll give you data. I'm an engineer. I use data. I said, in 1986, your illustrious predecessor, Rajiv Gandhi, went to Berlin and promised single window fast track for German business people. Nothing happened. Poor guy, he went in 1987 to Tokyo and again promised single window. I said, it is 17 years now, Dr. Manmohan Singh, has it happened? He said, I agree, it has not happened. And then, you know, Ratan and Deepak and Ashok became the members of that commission. I don't think their hands were strengthened. I don't think they made it easy for them to bring about the transformation of the mindset that foreigners want. These are all extraordinary people. You know, you have Ratan, you have Deepak, you have Ashok. Three of them could have brought extraordinary change if they had been fully supported by the bureaucracy. Therefore, I entirely agree with Cyril that we have a schizophrenia. At one level, we talk of being pro-business. When it comes to the ground level reality, we are anti-business.
Mr. Parekh, do you believe that perhaps we're at the cusp of change when it comes to aligning what we say and what we do? At least that's what the Prime Minister would have us believe.
I think we have come very close.
But is it easier to sell the India story today?
Today it's very easy.
And not just because of what the government is doing, but also because relatively we're looking better, at least as far as the emerging market basket is concerned.
Absolutely. I think the mood outside 6 months ago was totally, no one wanted to hear the India story. No one wanted to really invest or even hear the India story. You had analysts telling you that there are 40 people on a call on India. The last 1 year, there have been 4 or 5. They didn't want to hear our story. That has changed totally. So we have to capitalize on. We have to capitalize on by making easier single window clearances. Single window clearance is the most important for any industry to come.
March 2015 is the deadline that the DIPP has set. Let's see what happens to that. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And Nana, thank you very much for joining us here to talk about the need for a new kind of leadership in India and what that leadership ought to be about. But before I let you go, I'm going to ask each one of you to give me just in one line your idea, your concept of leadership. Shiv, let me start by asking you. It's 10 years of the India Business Leader Awards. What does leadership mean to you, and what is the sort of leadership that you would like India to enjoy?
Yeah, a leader is somebody who inspires enormous trust. And trust is a combination of character and competence. It's both. That's what, to me, leadership is about.
Mr. Murthy?
I'll use the words of George Bernard Shaw. And he said, most people see things as they are and wonder why. I dream of things that never were and say, why not? I think that to me is leadership.
Mr. Parekh?
Well, you cannot really define leadership according to me in one sentence, but I think a leader has to be a number. First of all, we have shortage of leaders, the dearth of leaders in India. I'm optimistic that the younger generation, I find much more leaders emanating in the younger side. Basically, accessibility, humility, approach, humbleness, and he must have followers. He must have something that attracts people to follow him.
Nana?
It is about vision, but it is also about making sure that you are the Pied Piper that makes sure that the followers are following in the direction you want. It is about ensuring implementation, and at the end of the day, it is to ensure that the outcomes that you set for yourself are indeed achieved.
Cyril?
Belief and competent execution.